At issue tonight, support for Ukraine. Tensions between the United States and Ukraine grow as Donald Trump calls its democratically elected president a dictator, blaming the war on him. Prime Minister Trudeau spoke with Volodymyr Zelenskyy today, rejecting how the U.S. has handled peace talks.
It's a fundamental principle for Canada and for the vast majority of our allies that nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine.
So what do Trump's comments mean for peace in Ukraine and for the rules-based order supported by Canada and other allies? I'm Rosemary Barton, here to break it down tonight. Chantal Hebert, Coyne and Althia Raj. Good to see you all. There's also a meeting now planned in Kyiv on Monday with a number of world leaders, European leaders, and others who are going to be there to offer support for President Zelenskyy. Andrew, I'm going to start with you on this one. How troubling is this dynamic and this move by Trump to adopt even some of the same language as President Putin?
Well, every time we think we've got our minds around how bad it can get under Donald Trump, he goes further. I don't think that's accidental. He always exceeds expectations of how bad he's going to be. So I think prior to maybe a couple of weeks ago, people might have thought he was insufficiently supportive of Ukraine or overly eager to get a peace deal. I think it's very clear after the last couple of weeks that that's not the case. It's much worse than that. It's not just that he gave up too many concessions at the beginning of a process in which you would be negotiating things back and forth. It's not just that. It's that he's basically on the side of the Russians. I think that is by now a pretty well-established point of view. When you were talking about Ukraine having started the war, when you're talking about adopting the Putin line on you should have elections right now in the middle of a war zone with a fifth of your country under occupation, when you start talking about making demands on Ukraine that it pay, I think Mr. Trump put it, $500 billion in reparations, whatever you want to call it. That's the sort of thing you usually do against the aggressor after they've lost the war, not a fellow democracy fighting for its life. So couple that with the discussions at the Munich conference in Europe, where his Secretary of Defense, where his Vice President both made extraordinary remarks that basically told Europe it was on its own, not just Ukraine, but Europe was on its own effectively in any conflict with Russia. You can see why leaders across Europe are now scrambling to on the supposition that at best the United States is no longer a reliable ally in these kinds of conflicts, and at worst it is basically on the side of the Russians.
So in light of all that very good context that Andrew put on the table there, Chantal, what does a country like Canada do? What do NATO allies do when this seems to be upending what our understanding of the United States was or is?
So one, on Ukraine, we do not have the lead. France, Germany, the UK will have that lead. Second, silver lining here, Canada felt lonely being attacked by Donald Trump. Now he has managed to make just about every former ally of the United States figure this guy, under this guy, the US is not our friend. And so new alliances, new developments, things that we have not seen in our lifetimes will come out of this. But the notion that the United States can decide the fate of Ukraine without European or Ukraine's presence, I think even from a Canada standpoint, I do not see a federal leader in this country backing that idea. No.
Althia, your thoughts?
Well, so much has changed just within a week. And to mention some of Andrew's points, it kind of sounds like the U.S. president is repeating Kremlin talking points. And so it's not just that Europeans are having to scramble, and I have to say that the French president has really kind of risen to the occasion. And we see the Europeans, not just the NATO countries, but EU countries, EU plus countries, Norway included in that, coming and recognizing that they need to fill a gap urgently, and Canada is part of those discussions, so that's a positive sign for us. But it's like the rules-based international order that Chrystia Freeland used to talk so much about when she was the Foreign Affairs Minister are under attack by the very country that basically set them up. And so we are having to think about what it means here. And I say, like, so much has changed within a week because Pierre Poilievre had a big speech just a few blocks away from where I'm sitting. And in it, one of the scenarios he painted was that we should move towards closer economic integration with the United States as a way to address the tariff threat. I'm not sure, following the Ukraine comments, that that is a sellable position anymore, even to conservatives. Like, the party of Ronald Reagan, the Republican Party, is not recognizable at all. And so many conservatives in this country who are Ronald Reagan's fans don't see themselves in the MAGA Trump party and don't see themselves in part of their own party as well. So I think we are having to think about what it means for not just our economic security, but our defense security, because we cannot trust our former allied partner.
Chantal, you wanted in?
What's interesting is that I know you may want to get back to that, but Stephen Harper wrote a letter today that actually said the last thing to do is to move towards further integration economically with the United States. So at some point, there was a letter that, by and large, sounded like what conservatives used to be like. And curiously, it did not seem to come in support of this notion of Mr. Poilievre that we should move towards further integration.
And we're going to talk a little bit more about that in the next block. But Andrew, I do want to get back to Ukraine, because my colleague Evan Dyer wrote a piece comparing the language that President Trump uses about Canada to the language that President Putin uses about Ukraine. I don't know. I mean, that is something that immediately springs to mind, right? That if he's willing to let Putin run over Ukraine, what is he saying about this country?
Yeah, I do think we have to be fair to Mr. Poilievre, though, before we go on to that, which is that was he gave the United States two options. Right. One of which was, let's trade even more. I don't think there was any talk of a formal integration or anything like that, but just we'll trade even more. But his first option was, he was talking in terms that sounded to me like he was putting on the table using our natural resources as a quote-unquote leverage. In other words, using it as a bargaining chip. So I think it was a broader discussion than just let's have a closer integration. And we can come back to whether that's any kind of useful idea. But no, look, all the alarm bells should be ringing. When you see the likes of Stephen Harper, when you see the likes of Lloyd Axworthy, talking as if we are not literally necessarily the next Ukraine in terms of military invasion, but certainly in a very bad place right now. The thing that used to be our great advantage and strength, that we had proximity to the largest superpower in the world and the largest consumer market in the world, that is no longer an advantage. It is now a liability. And one of the liabilities, certainly, I think we're going to have to discuss, is what use is a free trade agreement with a country and administration that simply refuses to honor anything it signs? Are you simply at that point, does it simply become an entanglement? Does it simply become a lever for that country to use essentially economic blackmail on you? We always want to be free traders. We always want to be in our own interests. We want to be as open to foreign competition as we possibly can with every country that we possibly can. But formal free trade agreements with this kind of administration, I mean, where you're making concessions in return for them making concessions, well, you can't count on their concessions ever actually amounting to anything. So we've got to be looking extremely seriously, even at just the economic level. But let's not kid ourselves. If the United States and Russia are now essentially on the same side, we are wedged in between them, with the very attractive prize of the North, the Arctic, in between us. I'm not worried at this point about anybody invading Toronto. I'm extremely worried about the United States, Russia, China, any of these powers setting up shop in the North, essentially just thumbing their noses at our sovereignty, extracting resources and what have you.
Quick 30 seconds, because I saw Althea shake her nod in agreement, and then we'll leave it there.
We just don't have the capacity to defend the land that we claim as our own, right? And so we are having to think through a kind of sci-fi scenario about what uncoupling means, not just economically to the free trade deals that Andrew's talking about, CUSMA, but also about all aspects of the way that we participate, whether that's NORAD, whether it's the health of the Great Lakes. Like, what does it mean if you cannot trust any of the information or your partner that you have built a relationship over 100+ years? Like, I think that is the planning scenario, because you don't know what's going to happen next week or next month, and you have to prepare for that.
Okay, quickly, Chantal, then I got to take a break.
but that also takes into account the assumption that this is where the U.S. will want to go over the next 4 years. I'm not convinced that you can carry public opinion. Has anyone asked the U.S. if they want us, like Americans? I'm not convinced that they do.
At issue, Liberal leadership. With the English and French debates approaching, leadership contenders are firming up their pitches as the best answer to Donald Trump, while the Conservatives are using the Trump threats to explain their approach.
You know, the media is now saying that I should change my entire platform because of the tariff threat. In fact, the Trump tariff threats have proven Conservatives right on everything.
Here to break down the latest on the Liberal leadership race and how the parties are addressing the Trump tariff threat, Chantal, Andrew, and Althia. Chantal, I'll start with you. I mean, what's interesting is the way everyone is making everything they're doing about Donald Trump. And Pierre Poilievre, apparently they don't call it a pivot, what he did Saturday. I'm not sure it's a pivot. What did you make of where his speech got us in terms of his approach to Donald Trump?
I think it got the Conservative Party the clips it wanted for advertising, and that the people in the room were a great backdrop for that. Whether it was a pivot or not, I don't think it made a significant impression. And it came on the Saturday, in between two storms, no control from the Conservatives over that. But the long weekend in most provinces that actually extended to Quebec because of snow. And I saw no real effort to pitch any of that, except to spend the past week saying there was no pivot, nothing happened, move on, people. So I'm assuming that's the message, that nothing happened.
What do you make of that, Althia? Because everyone else, Mark Carney was here with me on Sunday talking about how he'd tackle Trump. Chrystia Freeland is putting forward lots of policy about how she would take things on.
Well, no one has said that Mr. Poilievre should abandon his entire platform. I don't think I've read anybody say that or heard anybody say that. But people have been talking about how he has pivoted or refocused his message, and you saw that with, the Canada First underneath the lectern just there, and having to retool the messages, some of which he's been repeating for 2 years, towards the new threat. And I just want to, he did talk about how the United States should be better served with would be no better served with anybody but us, to Andrew's point. But then he also floated this idea that we should integrate more. I just wanted to clarify that. I think what is most interesting is just the time spent attacking Mark Carney. Whether it was in the speech, whether it was in the press conference that he gave, I'm losing track of time, today or yesterday, the way he's trying to tie Mr. Carney as being like the economic steward of the Liberal government over the past 5 years, which is factually inaccurate. But they're throwing everything at it because clearly they are worried. One thing I will stress is accurate is when Mr. Poilievre makes criticisms of Mr. Carney's economic plan, which was unveiled this week, where he says a lot of it is borrowed from Justin Trudeau. And he's right, it does sound like it is borrowed. The same suggestion that they're going to run deficits and they're going to invest more, they're going to catalyze private sector money to create larger projects. Well, Justin Trudeau ran on the same promises, and they didn't seem to have worked out the way he intended. So why does Mark Carney think it will be different for him? So I do think there are some factual things that Mr. Poilievre has laid on the table that have legs. And there are other things that he's just, I think, trying to throw spaghetti at the wall, trying to see what will stick.
One of the things that they've used now is the word sneaky. That's what they now keep calling Mark Carney. He's sneaky. That's the adjective they're trying to attach to him. Andrew, your thoughts?
Well, back to the speech. The speech itself, I think on its own was pretty good. It I think struck, my reading of anyway, struck an appropriately defiant note against Mr. Trump. In particular, the phrase about the barony burden pay price. One of the things that Stephen Harper's earlier intervention has put on the table, which I think is really important for anybody leading Canada at this moment, is we're maybe limited in what we can do to the United States in retaliation, but what we can communicate is our own resolve and our own willingness to pay the price for our independence. And that's very important for all of our political leaders to be doing. And the rest of it, there were some swipes at the opposition, but Mr. Carney, but much less, frankly, than is the typical Poilievre speech. most of it was pretty mainstream conservatism. It wasn't things about the World Economic Forum or Bitcoin. It was about, strong defense, fiscal discipline, free markets, and free enterprise.
Yeah.
So if we were just judging from the speech, you would say, okay, that's a pivot and that's where he's going. Except all around it, he's being careful now to cozy up to people like Rebel, the Rebel News organization, which is hardly anyone's definition of a mainstream conservative outlet. Even suggesting it, I read in reports, even suggesting that he might be open to extending subsidies to them. I don't think any news organization or professed news organization should be getting subsidies, but certainly not the Rebel. So it's a very much a mixed bag. We will have to see what happens going forward. It would be in his interest, you would think, to be projecting a more mainstream image, a more prime ministerial aura, but his own calculation seems to be that he needs to keep the further fringes inside the tent.
Today, in a press conference, he did not take any questions from quote-unquote mainstream media.
He took a question from Radio-Canada.
Oh, from Radio-Canada.
And because no one was around from that
one was there to ask
far-right media to ask questions in French.
That's right.
But
Okay, fair
no,
enough.
I don't think he's... that was my point about taking the speech from Saturday, which was meant and did fit the prime ministerial mode, and spending the rest of the time trying to diminish it. His own
That's right.
MPs, well, the one who speaks in Quebec, because the other ones have become ghosts, spent the week saying there was no pivot. Well, then why did you bother bringing all these people in the middle of storms after Valentine's Day to deliver an important speech if you're not going to say anything about it, except it was same old, same old? Mr. Carney.
Yes.
I find it very generous to describe what he unveiled, or did he really unveil anything in Scarborough, as an economic plan. I'm still waiting for a real economic plan, because that kind of didn't fit the profile.
No, it was more like a framework for what an economic plan will be when it comes. I would agree. Okay.
Yeah.
At issue, high-speed rail. Justin Trudeau announced his government's long-awaited plans for high-speed rail between Quebec and Ontario.
A reliable, efficient, high-speed rail network will be a game changer for Canadians, slashing travel times by half, getting you from Toronto to Montreal in 3 hours.
So is this about securing a piece of Liberal legacy, possible response to Donald Trump? Will it go ahead under a new government? Chantal, Andrew, and Althia back to answer all of that. I mean, high-speed rail, if you could get from Quebec to Ontario in the kind of time they're talking about, it would be, we could all get together in person every Thursday. It would be manageable. Is it an actual thing, and what do you think this is about, Althia?
Is it an actual thing? It could be. If the next three governments, assuming that they have majority mandates, want to see it go through. So the thing that was announced this week is just basically another 5-year study about like where the route would go, et cetera, et cetera. They've been talking about this since Mark Garneau was transport minister, and they debated and basically like left it on the back burner because they couldn't figure out if they wanted high frequency or high speed, or if it was going to be a public-private partnership, or if it was going to be all public. I do think they wanted to get it out the door because Trudeau has been kind of making a lot of big announcements, I think, in terms of framing his legacy. We saw that with the Haida Gwaii Nation announcement earlier. But I also think that they wanted to get it off the book so that it would be one thing less that whoever becomes a Liberal leader can say that they're committed to. And it was very clear, both Ms. Freeland and Mr. Carney said, yes, that they would continue this project.
Yeah, it also sets
I don't know
up
if it's going to happen because we've been talking about it for the past 30 years.
Totally.
Maybe
It
close
also
to 40, yeah.
Yeah, it also sets up the question to Pierre Poilievre, would you cancel it or would you keep it? I don't know whether that would make a difference in terms of votes, but Chantal.
So I am not going ever to be on that train coming to do it in my lifetime. And if it ever happens, I will not even be around to watch it from whatever seniors
Maybe it happens
home
really
I am
fast. We don't know. Yeah.
Let's agree on that for
Okay.
one. Two, I think the announcement went through because Chrystia Freeland and Mark Carney were also in support of it going through. And why? Because it is a popular idea.
Yes, it
and where southern Quebec, southern Ontario, what is that? The prime real estate that you want to win in an election.
Sure is.
And very popular in business circles. So when you put all that together, and it was a step in a process that had already been started.
Right.
As to whether it sees the light of day, I can't tell you, except to sadly say, we are not doing well on traveling between Montreal, Toronto, places where it should be easy and where business needs to travel.
Yes.
Having given to that, taking a plane that actually takes off or getting a train that arrives on time, almost impossible.
Yes, yes.
And Chantal knows this firsthand over the last 2 weeks.
Yeah, it's a challenge. It's a challenge.
Story of my life.
Yeah, that's why we don't force her to leave all the time. Andrew.
There's two issues, the policy and the timing.
Yeah.
The policy is frankly crazy. There's a reason why we've looked at this repeatedly dozens of times over the last 30, 40 years. And every time we do, we come back with a higher and higher and higher number for what it would cost. I think the latest estimate is $80 billion, $100 billion, $120 billion, whatever that is. Whatever it is now, you can count on it being vastly greater than that when the thing is finally built. This is so we can subsidize people to leave other forms of transit that we are also subsidizing, but won't be subsidizing quite as heavily as we'll now be subsidizing the train. Wouldn't it be better as a country, if a more sensible policy, if we drained all of the subsidies out of all of the different modes of transport and let people choose which transport to take based on the real costs of them? To be doing this kind of costly enterprise at a time when we're being asked, first of all, to foot the bill for a rapidly aging population and all the massive increases in healthcare costs that have come from that, at a time when we have to make extraordinary new investments in defense spending, to be putting it on this kind of hugely uneconomic project, I think is nonsense. But leaving that aside, to be doing so at the moment when the government is effectively hiding from Parliament. It has shuttered Parliament because it's afraid it will lose a non-confidence vote. He has no legitimacy to be unveiling at this moment this kind of policy.
It does have legitimacy. It does have legitimacy, Andrew. I take your point about the complaint that Parliament's not there, but the government still has legitimacy.
He has the legal power to do so, but to be doing so at a moment when he cannot face the Parliament. He knows that his government has effectively lost the confidence of the government. Fine, put it out there as a campaign proposal, but don't pretend that this is in any way some kind of, that this is now a done deal or settled proposition. This is a suggestion.
Okay.
Well, we don't know if it's a suggestion because we don't know what the nature of the contract is. How is he financially tying the hands of the future governments, and how much is that going to cost taxpayers? I do think that is a valid question.
Yeah. Okay. Last point, Chantal. Then I got to go.
But we also know that that is part of a process that did not happen to be announced this week and was announced when Parliament was sitting. Yeah. So if the opposition parties were fighting against it, I didn't notice.
Okay, I got to leave it there. That is that issue for this week. Thank you all very much. I'm Rosemary Barton. Thanks for watching.